or songs. Even when they are not set to a tune, they can be sung along. These rhymes have been around for many, many centuries. Some of them date back to the 11th and 12th centuries. But they have mostly been an oral tradition and have been passed down the generations. The first book of rhymes was published in 1744, and the hugely popular Mother Goose Rhymes was published only in 1780. The mention of the term nursery rhymes evokes images of happy, carefree children and cute talking animals. Parents sing these rhyming ditties to their children, but they rarely stop to examine the lyrics. And why would they, after all, considering that these rhymes are part of the kindergarten curriculum? But go deep into them, and you come across many frightening and dark backstories that range from the morbid to the gruesome and the downright sinister. Let's start with Ring a Ring of Roses or Ring Around the Rosie. It is called by many names. Let's start with this because it is very relevant in the current scenario. Urban legend has it that this is about the plague pandemic, could be the plague pandemic of 1665, 1666, which decimated more than 100,000 people in England. Or it could be about the Black Death, the bubonic plague that ravaged Europe and killed anywhere between 100 and 200 million people. The Ring of Roses refers to the rashes that appeared on the bodies of plague victims. To ward off the bad smell caused by plague, people carried posies or bunches of flowers to ward off the smell. The posies also had herbs, hoping people were hoping that it would cure the disease. But in spite of all these precautions, people fell down dead. Ashes here refers to the cremation of bodies to prevent the spread of disease. I really wanted to share this with you. The picture on the left is of the plague doctor. And you can see that they have PPEs, which are very similar to the ones used by doctors at present. They have this huge robe that covers their bodies. They wear gloves, and they did touch patients with their hands. They used this long stick to flick back bedclothes. They covered their heads, and they had a tight-fitting mask. Holes were cut around the eyes, and they wore glasses, and they had a beak. The beak was for two reasons. The first was that people thought that the plague was caused by evil spirits, and a frightening-looking doctor could chase them away. The beak was also an aperture into which they put petals of roses and other sweet-smelling flowers to ward off the bad smell, and the herbs to cure the disease. On the right, we have modern PPEs. So there's really not that much of difference. Now we go to another age-old theme, which also has a lot of relevance. We are going back to the feudal age when landless laborers were exploited by the crown, by the church, and even by the ordinary farmer. Wool was central to England's economy. Anyone who had a piece of land raised sheep. Wool was needed to make cloth, and it was exported also. When Edward I came back from the very costly crusades, he found his coffers almost empty, and he decided to levy a punishing tax on wool. 1/3 of every bag of wool was given to the king, here called the master, 1/3 to the church, here referred to as the dame, and 1/3 to the farmer. The last two lines here have actually been revised. The original read, "and none for the little boy who cries down the lane." So exploitation of landless laborers continues even today. Now this rhyme, whatever the illustration may show you, is definitely not about a garden. It is about Queen Mary I, who was the daughter of Edward VIII and Catherine of Aragon. Catherine failed to give her husband a male heir, so he wanted to divorce her and marry Anne Boleyn. For this, he needed a papal dispensation, but the Pope was not willing to give it. So Henry left the Catholic fold and started the Anglican Church and made himself the head of it. He tried to promote Protestantism, as did his son, Edward, who ruled for a very, very short time. Mary, a staunch Catholic, when she ascended the throne, tried to bring back Catholicism. She asked people to reconvert, and when they did not do so, she had them burnt at the stake. She's supposed to have had burnt more than 284 people at the stake, and she earned herself the nickname Bloody Mary. The garden here refers to the graveyards growing with Protestant dead. Cibber bells and cockle shells are instruments of torture, and pretty maids refers to Protestant women who had been killed. This again is a poem about religious persecution, and again, the central figure is our lovely Queen Mary I. The three blind mice are three Protestant bishops, Rattray, Latimer, and the Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Cranmer. Now, Cranmer had written the Book of Common Prayer, which is actually a Bible in English, and it was very useful in converting people to Protestantism. So obviously, he was Mary's enemy. She asked the three bishops to renounce their faith, and when they refused to, she had them burnt at the stake. Now, a lot of people think that they were blinded before they were burnt, but that's not true. Here, the word blind refers to their Protestant beliefs, which the Catholics thought were blind. Goosey Goosey Gander is again about religious persecution, but from the other side. When Mary I's half sister, Elizabeth I, ascended the throne, she wanted to again change England into a Protestant country. So, Latin prayers and Catholicism was forbidden, and anyone praying according to Catholic rituals would be burnt at the stake. But people continued to practice their faith in secrecy, and many rich people had priest holes built in their houses. Priest holes were small rooms or chambers where Catholic prayers were said, and whenever there was a sudden Protestant raid, the Catholic priests would hide in these priest holes. And if anyone was caught, any Catholic priest was caught, he would be thrown down the stairs. In other words, he would be killed. This next poem deals with blind superstition and is downright sinister. It deals with human sacrifice. The superstition back in the day was that a human sacrifice had to be buried in the foundation of a bridge if the bridge were not to collapse. So they would entomb or immure a person, usually a small child. And they were still not sure that the bridge would not fall. So they thought of setting a watchman to watch all night, but then the watchman may go to sleep. So they, they had this ironic belief that the spirit of the dead child would watch over the bridge and keep it safe. This is a picture of immurement. Georgie Porgy Pudding and Pie. I'm sure a lot of you have read Jane Austen and probably even Georgette Hare. In fact, Georgette Hare uh, deals very often with the Prince Regent called Prinny, who was later on George the Fourth. And those of you who have been to Bath would have seen the buildings that he erected. They're usually very, very fanciful and ornate. Georgie Porgy was a man of very strong appetites. He obviously ate a lot, so pudding and pie. He's supposed to have had a 50-inch waist. He was always also known for his amorous adventures. At the age of 23, he married Maria Fitzherbert, who was a commoner and a Catholic. And that marriage wasn't really legal because she was she was a commoner, and he had a whole lot of children through Fitzherbert and a whole lot of other women. Again, he would force his unwanted attentions on a lot of his young female guests. So that's the line, kiss the girls and made them cry. When the boys came out to play refers to George used to like bare knuckle boxing, and he also used to like prize fights, which in those days was illegal. So during one of these boxing matches, one of the contestants fell down and died. And George was so frightened that the police would come and apprehend him, and there would be a scandal. So Georgie Porgy ran away. This is obviously a lullaby that was really not meant to be sung. Uh, it says, when the bough breaks, the cradle will fall, and down will come baby, cradle and all. So it's not really something that anybody would sing to their child. It's very, very inauspicious. So this clearly is a vehicle to pass a political message to people. James II of the Stuart line wanted to make sure that his line would continue. He also wanted the Catholic monarchy to continue. So when his wife went into labor, he had a male child smuggled into the birthing chamber, and just as well, because she gave birth to a stillborn child. The switch was made. Here, wind is metaphorical. It refers to the Protestant wind that is blowing from Netherlands in the form of James II's Protestant daughter, Mary, and her husband, William of Orange. So the Dutch couple marched over to England with their army, and they took the throne in what is called as the bloodless revolution. So what they actually did was, there wasn't a war, but they made a deal with Parliament whereby uh, Parliament was given more powers. They were promised regular and free elections. Protestantism was made the state religion, and there was a definite shift in the balance of power. Earlier on, England was an absolute monarchy, and the king was all powerful. He could do anything to parliament. But this changed the balance, and England became a constitutional monarchy. This happened through the royal couple signing the Bill of Rights. On the left-hand side, you may observe a warning which appeared in the first publication of this poem. It said, "This may serve as a warning to the proud and ambitious who climb so high that they generally fall at last." So clearly not really meant as a lullaby. So most of these rhymes we have reviewed so far are clearly very offensive, especially in the modern child-centric society. If people really knew the meaning of these rhymes, I doubt they would teach it to their children. But you never know; it is just so very convenient. Uh, the Victorians, with their rigid moral sense, were absolutely aghast. They set up the British Society for Nursery Rhyme Reform. They revised many nursery rhymes, making them more suitable for children, and they identified almost 100 rhymes which they said should be banned. But psychoanalysts deplored deplored this. They felt that these dark rhymes actually allowed children to deal with the danger in a controlled environment. So, were these nursery rhymes really written for children? I'm sure that many of them were, but a lot of them belong to traditions of parody. A lot of them were coward protests against royalty and high culture. In those days, caricature of royalty and politicians was punishable by death. So these rhymes were a very convenient way of smuggling in political messages with, without being punished for them. In largely illiterate societies, these rhymes were a very convenient way of remembering stories and history, and more importantly, communicating them to the next generation. So, nursery rhymes are definitely a triumph of the power of history, of the oral traditions of history. Thank you. If there's any rhyme you would like me to review, I'll do it.
Yeah, Humpty Dumpty, I've heard, is also sinister.
See, Humpty Dumpty, actually, there are many theories. One being that it refers to Louis the 16th and his wife, but that is not really true because this poem was this rhyme was written 30 years before they were guillotined. What people actually say is that during the war, the skirmishes between the Roundheads, who were Protestant, the followers of Oliver Cromwell, and Charles Stuart, uh, the royal forces used a huge cannon. It was really huge, and it was nicknamed Humpty Dumpty. They carried it up the wall of a church, and they kind of decimated the Roundheads till the Roundheads shot the steeple of the church, and this fell into the bog of the surrounding area. And then the Roundheads were able to defeat the king's army.
Sujaya,
Yeah,
you really opened my minds to the sinister minds behind creating these. But I
yeah,
have a larger question.
yeah,
Without even worrying about the deeper meanings which they tried to implant into these, even as they have survived at the superfluous level, they are so destructive.
yes.
So, why the hell was this used as rhymes for children? That's my first question and comment.
Yeah.
The second, the British Society for Nursery Rhymes obviously did a very poor job, because in spite of revising and banning, what has survived? Piggy on a railway, picking up stones, down came the engine, broke Piggy's bones, may not have any Victorian depth, but it is still very, very destructive.
Yeah.
So whose bright idea was it to expose this as nursery rhymes to children?
Okay, so what I personally feel and is I mentioned, uh, not everything was written for children, and a lot of them belong to traditions of parody. So what I really think was this was not written for children at all. Um, See, there are two things. One of the reasons I feel they were not written for children is that some of the themes would just not be comprehensible to children. For example, the Baba Black Sheep, where you talk about taxes. I don't think toddlers would know anything about taxes. Similarly, can I just tell you about Jack and Jill, because I think that's also uh,
Yeah.
pretty interesting. So Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. Jack fell down and broke his crown, and Jill came tumbling after. Nobody ever goes up a hill to fetch water. There's more water to be found on the plains. So the story goes that Charles the First wanted to increase taxes on alcohol, but Parliament refused. So he did it in a very indirect way. He reduced the volumes of the half pint, which was called a Jack, and the quarter pint, which was called a Jill. So Jack fell down and Jill came tumbling after. So many of these things would not be comprehensible to little children. But as far as the gruesome part goes, there are two things to think of. The first is that children in, in the normal day to day life in those days were exposed to a lot of violence. You must remember that beheadings took place in the common marketplace. People who were caught for some kind of crime were put into stocks, and the stocks were in the marketplace. And children would have seen their parents spitting at these criminals, jeering at them. And in those days, when somebody was going to be beheaded, hung, a holiday would be declared, and it would be like a fair. There would be people selling pies and buns and what have you, and it was generally a very festive affair, almost like a mela. So, children were exposed to the harsh realities of life, and though those were not child-centric societies. Today, we have a very child-centric society. Childhood is a big deal today. We as parents are always worried whether we've done enough for the children. We want to, uh, we want the, don't want the children to be exposed to very negative things. It wasn't like that in those days. And I think also a lot of people, as I said, don't really examine the lyrics. Um, I'll tell you an example of myself. Though I had earlier heard the real story behind Rings and Rings of Roses and Mary, Mary Quite Contrary, I used to really find it very difficult to make my son sleep. So one day I was singing Rockabye Baby. You know, you don't really think it's a very convenient way to make the children sleep. And while I was singing it, I suddenly thought, oh my God, what what am I singing? It is so inauspicious. So maybe even we parents who know something of it, maybe we're just lazy, maybe it just works, and maybe we just uh, go along. So
No, let me just reframe that question. Maybe I shouldn't have said, why did they write it for children? as you rightly clarified, it was not written for children. But I'm amazed that in the last 100 years, with the way society has evolved, lifestyles have evolved, we shouldn't be worried about whether this generation of parenting is different. But in the last 100 years, the whole world has allowed this to continue. All of us to teach these children. I'm extremely surprised.
Yes, we have. And in fact, I think we should rewrite rhymes that teach children principles. Of course, there were some rhymes that were harmless, like 30 days had September, April, June, and November. There were rhymes like that. But we should maybe talk about, conservation of nature and other things. Maybe we should make rhymes on these things. Maybe this just works, and which is why I was so keen on
doing this lecture,
sharing this.
But I think Prasad, nice. I have a point. See, looking back at when we were exposed to these rhymes, you're wondering how come we taught all this, how come we sang all this. We never knew. See, all these years, the first inkling that I got of these darker undertones is with this ringer roses that all fall down. Oh, it's about the plague. Up until then, we had no suspicion.
I'm not even referring to the deeper motivations for writing that. You're absolutely right. We didn't know. But even at the superfluous level, every rhyme talks of a destruction or something that is unpleasant.
But even after, what I'm saying is, even when we were aware that it is violent and unpleasant, like, when we were like in our early teens or, young 20-year-olds, we've heard it. We knew it was violent. We never thought it was, we never were upset about it being sung or being taught. I think that's what happened in these last 100 years, and for all of us,
I think it's a collective failure.
Yeah, it is. We never thought it was that bad. We never dissected it so finely to look at what the deeper meanings were, and that is there in a lot of facets of our lives.
Because of this.
But I think we also tend to, skip over a lot of these things when we are children. You take Hindi movies, you take Tamil movies, they're so violent, children enjoy them. The dances
exactly.
The children perform are so erotic sometimes, and they don't realize what they're doing.
And even this whole movies, when it comes to movies, this thing about now we say, oh my God, that guy is talking. Oh, that guy is talking, and he's. When we were watching these very movies, where did we have a problem with it? Where did we ever think that this was talking or that was not on? So I think our worldview and our ethos and our outlooks are changing. And so we are looking retrospectively and saying, oh my God, why did we do that? But when we were in that place, in that circumstance, it never bothered us that much. I think it's just evolution in process.
On a related
other thing that I would like to say is that parents do not want to expose their children to cruelty and uncomfortable things. But if you have noticed, children are actually quite cruel. The way children would tease their classmates. If one of your friends had a problem, with eyesight or something, you would not make fun of that person. But children will call their classmates chashmish and four eyes and that kind of thing. They make fun of children who don't do well in studies. Children are not what we would like to really think. We have this very rosy, very very emotional picture about children being innocent and next to God and all that kind of thing. But I think childhood is very, very harsh, and it is harsh. No, you don't agree, but.
No, I agree with your assessment, but that's no reason for us to let things be as they are. That's my point of view.
No, yeah, that I totally agree with you. With you, and I also think that we in India, even when we, even English medium schools should start writing their own poems, things that would teach children lessons. For example, there was one in my school, said, stop says the red light, go says the green, wait says the yellow light. blinking in between. And we Indians break every single traffic rule. So, and parents don't correct children. So I think the education system would do well to introduce.
On a similar note, it's why nursery rhymes. If I were to just ask, what's our favorite cartoon?
Correct.
Tom and Jerry.
Tom and Jerry.
It's all about bash, 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 bash.
Yes.
And it is children being close to God, all that. I think there is some innocence, but socialization has always been a conscious, motivated initiative by the powers that be, people who wanted to create certain influences in society. So I think it's time that we recognize that, Murli's point on movies is again a classic one. There's so much happening in movies, so much, what is it, double meaning that gets conveyed, and we just ignore it. Nursery rhymes, I can't even understand why we still continue to nurture them.
No, but the thing is that nursery rhymes were not really written for children, because how many children back in the 12th and 13th and 14th centuries actually went to school? So these were probably songs sung in the community, and children just learnt it. And we must remember that they were published very, very late. These rhymes were published in the 1700s, when probably a lot of people had lost touch with it. And if you notice, even fairy tales are very, very, very cruel and harsh. What big eyes you have, grandmama, what big teeth you have, would frighten a small child, I would think.
I think basically kids enjoy these extreme kind of things, Like peekaboo is your parent is disappearing and then appearing again. So those kind of dramatic things are what catches kids' attention. And that's what many of these nursery rhymes actually do. So maybe that's why it stood the test of time. Kids are laughing away and enjoying them. They learn a few words, and ultimately that's what you want. All this dissection may have come up later. How did we actually know that it's, connected?
Sujaya, this is.
But I think we should move on, Ravi. Right? I think if we want to do some discussion on the
No,
movie.
this is also a freewheeling discussion. Can I just know what Ravi was trying to say?
Okay.
I want to say just one thing.
Yeah. Okay.
These are about only English rhymes.
Yeah,
But
I
there's
was just
none
going to
so
ask.
violent as there is
I was
none
asking
so
you to ask
violent as
what about
nursery
vernaculars?
rhymes like this in any of the Indian languages. That is because they have deciphered that what you should tell children and what you should not tell children. There is a norm there. So they have never written any rhymes which say anything vulgar or anything very frightening or anything very contrasting. So why should we follow only the English rhymes now? Because we have started dissecting the English rhymes now. So we find out all faults in it. It is only the sound and rhyme which we follow, which we followed for so many 100 years.
Yes.
Yeah, that was
Not
exactly
the meaning,
question
not
I
the
was-
meaning. It is for them to sing. It is only the tune and rhyme. Nothing else, because to make them remember things. But if you really enter into Indian languages, there is nothing at all which will spoil the children. That's all.
But I don't think any nursery rhyme spoiled us.
We don't
Come
know,
on.
because these are all.
We don't know many Indian language nursery rhymes.
Just because Jack and Jill climbed up a hill, who the hell thought that they're climbing up something?
Actually, these are songs.
I'm a poor innocent baby who was not corrupted by any nursery rhyme.
Yeah, we were also not corrupted. But we had basic characters and basic qualities to avoid them.
No, I think these songs were specifically made by people who were oppressed, people working class who were utilized by people who are higher up in the organization. This is their way of venting out their anger against powerful, because if they say openly, they would have been killed. So
maybe we need to measure what bad it has done to our children in these long years.
Yeah.
Because we have started dissecting it and analyzing it. So we can throw it off or have it.
Chalo, I think we should move on. Otherwise, we'll not get on to our next thing.
It's part of history, actually.
It is part
Yeah. No, definitely.
As I said, that they are part of traditions of parody. So this is how people want to pass messages among their peer group, among people of the same age and people of their own class. If you notice, most of these rhymes are against royalty and people in power. So you cannot walk out and
Only when you tell me.
okay, this guy is doing this. So it's just that somehow it got included as.
Children must have enjoyed it when they heard their parents singing. They would have enjoyed it. Hello, Ravi. Last word from you.
The point was in another discussion like this. It just reminded me that we tend to blame Westernization for many of these things. But if you look at it, two of the largest epics in the Eastern Indian context, for example, are the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. Both predominantly about action, forward action. I don't want to use the word violence, but they are. Whether it is Krishna killing a snake, whether it is Mahabharata, everyone knows, right? Right from disrobing to the... There is a lot of good, but it's not as though there is a Western-Eastern divide here. That was the only point I wanted to say.
And even in the Mahabharata, they use underhand means to achieve their ends, which is not really good. It's not really right. Like calling out Ashwatthama to the elephant.
Yeah, the elephant. I know, so wily.
That was also very wily. So it's not like we Indians are pure as driven snow. I think sometimes we like to think of ourselves like that, but
I think human beings are flawed, beginning to end. Whatever continent,
Yes,
whatever
everywhere
language.
it is there. But when we teach children how to think what you should and we should not.
Yeah, we should. So then the onus is on us to have new nursery rhymes to teach the children. Because
there are beautiful nursery rhymes. There are.
You're talking about English nursery rhymes, ma'am?
The new ones are coming. Beautiful ones.
New ones are coming. So we have to be smart to set them to good rhymes and rhythms, because it's the catchiness of this that has made it so popular.
And I don't think really the children's characters are built on a few rhymes or something that they teach them. Once they grow up, more than anything else, it is not what they are taught, but what their environment is. Like it doesn't matter what they are taught. If they are living in a home where somebody is dishonest and they get away with it, when the father treats the mother poorly, they treat their maids poorly. So these are the things that characters are built on, not rhymes.
Absolutely. I agree.
But the rhymes, they remember like tables.
Yeah, but it doesn't affect their characters. I don't think so.
It is not. Definitely, it is not going to change the character.
It did affect us. As you said, parents teach by example. They walk the talk. So if you have parents who walk the talk properly, then I guess children will learn. Like you see so many parents going on scooters, they're letting their underage children ride the scooter and not wear a helmet. So maybe these are the things that...
Okay, Prasad, why don't you take over with the movie?
Movie finish.
So, show of hands, how many people saw the movie? Okay, later.
Last 15 minutes I haven't seen.
Oh, the most important.
That's what you have to see. You missed the one. No, just kidding.
Can you all see the screen?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I'm just going to set some context to the discussion, and I'll make a few points. And like in the last movie review, it's really for everybody to make their observations. But I just want to put out a few key things. The fundamental premise of this film is what every constitution of every nation promises people who are on a trial. The constitution promises defendants a fair trial, and it is based on the presumption of innocence. It's very critical because it starts with the belief that a defendant is innocent until proven guilty and not the other way around. And therefore, it's never an onus of the defendant to prove that he is not guilty. It is the onus of the prosecution to prove that he is guilty. So I don't, as a defendant in a legal context, have to prove that I didn't do it. I can do it by attacking the prosecutor who's saying that I did. So this difference is very critical because this presumption of innocence is really the premise of this film. Now, the other important thing is the US legal system context. Many of us are not used to the jury system under British law and Indian law, but in the United States, a jury, which really is composed of eminent people from society, from all walks of life, and they then constitute the group which finally decides, having heard everything that has been argued in court, as to whether the defendant is guilty or not guilty. Now, unlike in civil cases where a jury of 12 could return a split verdict, and then that could decide the extent of sentencing and so on, all criminal cases in the United States need consensus, which means all 12 must agree or the case gets thrown out. This is except in Alabama state, which till today doesn't need a consensus, but that's an aberration. In 49 states out of 50 in the US, the jury must return a consensus verdict. If they don't, then they go through what is called a mistrial, and then it's up to the prosecution to decide whether they want to go for a retrial and go through the entire trial all over again. So you can imagine the onus and the responsibility that the jury carries, and that's another important place marker in this film, because that's what the whole film is based on. Now let's look at some of the trappings of this 1957 film, which has stood the test in a number of legal issues in the US. They have referred to this film as an example. It's amazing that we hear no prosecutor. We didn't hear any defense attorney arguments, and everything that we hear of the case and the evidence is secondhand to us through the words that the jurors use in debating the case. So now all of us seem to have been there in the courtroom listening to the prosecution's case and the defense cases, because that's how powerfully some of the arguments got communicated to us in the positions that jurors took. Nothing of the trial itself we saw, because out of the 94 minutes of the film, 3.5 minutes is in the initial courtroom sequence and a minute at the end when they all walk out. And all the other 89 minutes of the film is in that one room. And the trial itself, you can see the bored expression on the judge's, when he hands over the case to the jury. His tone almost indicated to me that in his mind, the verdict is a foregone conclusion. He would have thought that this jury will take 5 minutes to return a verdict of guilty. The entire film takes place within a small New York City jury room as 12 men debate the fate of a young defendant who's charged with murdering his father. And there in that room, we find logic, emotion, and prejudice struggle to control the field. And this is what keeps us so engrossed in a film which you can argue has no other action. It's a bunch of 12 people and powerfully written script which carries the day. And it's very difficult to take your eyes off or your ears away from what's happening on the screen. I'm going to focus on one of the words I used in the previous slide, which is prejudice. Charles Swindoll once said that prejudice is a learned trait. You're never born prejudiced. You're taught. You learn prejudice as you grow up. Some people are prejudiced because they don't want to understand another person's difference, or they feel scared, or they feel threatened, or they get prejudice built based on experiences they have gone through. And there are some very real examples of an existing prejudice, which is where this jury meeting starts with. You all will remember Ed Bagley, which is juror number 10, who right through was being difficult. And he seems to have a prejudice about Latinos, or these, he keeps calling them these guys, they are like that, they lie, they are guilty, and then everything that he talks reeks of a prejudice. The word prejudice itself comes from the original Latin words of prejudgment. And it's amazing that at this stage, when Ed Bagley is...
Are you talking on your slide, Prasad? Or sorry?
Yeah, I'm talking about the last point. Can you see Ed Bagley racist rant?
Oh, you didn't move your slide actually. At least it didn't move for us.
Did it move
Sorry.
on? Prejudice is a learned trait. Can you see that?
The slides haven't moved, Prasad.
Yeah, it's on the first slide only.
Original slide.
Sorry. Let me go over it again. Are you seeing the US legal system context?
Yes.
Yeah, now.
Then the trappings.
Yeah.
I think the full screen was not working. So let me go with this. So I was on this whole prejudice as a key issue, which seems to guide the dynamics in that room. And if you recall juror number 10, who, while he has been consistently prejudiced in the way he approached the arguments, he reaches a point where he rants on and on about the way these kids are. They are liars, they are like that, and they grow up like this. Almost, he has a clear worldview of, quote unquote, these Latino kids. And that is the point, and it was the most powerful scene in the film for me, because even many of the others who actually thought that the kid was guilty couldn't take the extent of his prejudice. So you see all of them one by one walking away from the table, and for a minute he's struck by the extent of hate that he's sort of spewing out. And alongside that, you start looking about the mindset of Henry Fonda, juror number 8, who says, has the slide come on? It's not about solving the crime.
Yeah.
Yes.
Where he hits the nail on the head. He says, this is not about solving the crime. We're not going to hear, argue and debate and find out what really happened. To me, the key issue is about sending a young man to die. We're talking about somebody's life here, the Fonda character says, and therefore we can't decide in 5 minutes. It's easy for all of us to wrap up and go. Somebody wants to go to a ball game. Somebody has another program. Somebody is, in any case, prejudged that this kid is guilty and thinks it's an open and shut case. His worry is it bothers his conscience, supposing we are wrong. Because there is a belief that you can let a guilty man get away. It's a crime, but you can let him get away. But it's a bigger crime to hang an innocent person. And therefore, the film, other than resting on the fundamental premise of proving not letting an innocent get sent to the gallows, the whole film is about the power of persuasion. What began as a score line of 11-1 becomes 0-12, and allowing them to return a not guilty verdict. I read somewhere about Simon Lumet, who's a director, and he talked about, other than all this wonderful script and a great plot which kept us engaged, lovely screenplay, he talked about some technical finesse that he used. He used the camera, he said, with varying focal lengths and positions to make the room seem smaller as the film developed. And after I read about it, I went and saw the film again. So he says he shot the first 1/3 of the movie above the eye level. So it's really, a lot of it is from the top. So it gives you the sense of the room in a certain way. He shot the second third of the film at eye level, and finally the last 1/3 of the film from below eye level. In that way, towards the end, the ceiling of the room starts showing up. So not only were the walls closing in, the ceiling was also closing in, and the sense of increasing claustrophobia did a lot to raise the tension of the last part of the movie. And I found that when I went back, so if ever you get a chance to want to examine some technical issues of the craft, this is a wonderful technique he used. Overall, extremely powerful for all these 2-3 key things it did, which is persuasion, prejudice, and the performance. What struck me was, till they walked out and introduced himself, he said, "I'm Davis." The entire film, not one of the characters knew the other guy's names. They were all busy calling themselves juror number 5, juror number 8. So those are my initial comments. Let's hear what the house has to say.
Prasad,
Yeah.
I've seen this movie 3 times.
Okay.
One was in 1992 in a class in Setup in France, in Fontainebleau,
Okay.
when 40 of us debated this film after it was shown to us. The second was yesterday till the internet went off. So I missed the last 15 or 20 minutes, which I saw it again today for most part of it, starting from about 1 hour back.
Okay.
There is no doubt it's a very powerful film. Very, very powerful film. And it brings many human traits and many human characters and many human frailties about how some people will never get convinced, even if facts are thrown to them in a very blunt and blatant manner. And there are guys who are willing to change their mind if facts are given to them. And there are guys who will not listen unless they are completely forced by their own minds to change, like the way the last guy, I forget his name, that changed. But one thing that left me, which is nothing to do with the quality of the film. The quality of the film is outstanding. I somehow felt that the quality of the jury, which is an extraneous factor, and it is quite possible the director wanted to exaggerate a few things to make a point. I accept all that, because that is the, shall we say, the liberty that a film director has. To make a point, you can always exaggerate, just like a storyteller's point. But I found that if this is the jury quality in the United States, I get a little bit worried, because I always have believed that we also must have two things in our legal system. One is an arbitration mechanism, which is not very good in India, which can solve a lot of problems. The second is a good jury system where the jurors are chosen very carefully. But some of the quality of some of the members of this 12-member jury was a little suspect. And I was wondering whether this reflected the actual jury quality in the United States, or it was only an exaggeration. But otherwise, the film was simply outstanding. And it is something which you cannot take your mind or ears or eyes off, even in the fourth or fifth viewing of the film.
I like the point that you make. In fact, it struck me also. And I wonder whether in the years it happened, the system of jury selection, which they go through now, the very elaborate system where you're allowed to reject. So both parties sit around, and the big process before a trial is really to pick the jury, and where based on a jury submission, and today there are issues about whether there are more blacks in it, whether there are more non-whites, and there are a whole host of racist issues. But then they get to reject X number of jury guys if they find that they are likely to have a bias. So I don't know whether in those years they had a similar rigorous opportunity to select or deselect juries. But you're right about it, that it seemed to have all kinds of people who maybe somewhere, one of the things that they always do is to establish that you're serious in terms of your commitment to the process, the intent of being on the jury.
Now, one other thing
some of them didn't have.
Yeah,
yes,
one
Ravi?
other I want to make is that, the Americans are generally aggressive. And the more aggressive that you demonstrate, the stronger you are perceived to be. That's a general impression of American businessmen or American even corporate executives. In this film, the stronger guys are the guys who don't speak to start with. The slightly older and the slightly quieter guys are the guys who are making the most important points of the film.
Correct. Yes.
The more vociferous guys, the more aggressive, typical American guys. A lot of talking in the beginning, and towards the end, their arguments peter out so badly that they are seen to be very weak. That's another observation that I had to make. Yeah, I am done.
But that, sir, that's the script of the movie. The movie has to go that way.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, but Vinny, I think the point he's making is that it was different from a stereotype of what you imagine to be. It was counterintuitive in terms of characterization.
See, Prasad, there's one thing that struck me about the movie, that why is it that all the 12 are men? why are there no women there, right?
That's how it was those days.
The time,
92.
Cities.
They had
Voter list.
Yeah.
When
see,
did suffrage come in? Which year? I'm not sure, but basically the jurors were picked from the voters list. Black were not allowed to vote also.
Yeah. So, then when you try to answer that question, it took me to another place, which is, what is this whole system of jury? Juries seem to have come from the fact that jurisprudence required to reflect the values and standards of the citizens. So it was necessary to bring in the common man. So I do not believe there was any strict process of making sure, qualifying criteria. They were just citizens, and the jury system needed to reflect those standards and values. And hence, at that time, I think the movie is set in the 50s. Women were still didn't have other rights, so their not being on the jury was possibly the reason.
I just checked Google. Rani just checked Google. The Civil Rights Act of 1957 allowed women the right to be on a jury, which means when this film was made, they didn't have the right.
Yeah.
And it wasn't
Suffrage was not
1973 that all the 50 states passed that, which means as late as 1972, you could have been in a state which didn't allow a woman to be on a jury.
This theme is has been brought out in several books and movies, because they say jury of your peers, but essentially it wasn't. So even in a fantastic book like To Kill a Mockingbird, that was the problem. The black guy was being tried in a case where it was an all-white jury. Now coming to jury selection, in those days it was, you just picked people off the voters list and they made the jury. A bunch of them were called, some of them were excused if they had reasons which were compelling enough, and the rest were put on jury. Of course, now the whole thing is a big drama because you have jury consultants. They will look at the body language of people and they will say, this guy is going to be more pro defense or more anti defense.
The case. So they will choose for the
there
case.
are psychologists sitting there. They are private investigators would have looked at the background of the jurors, and then they are chosen, hoping that they will be for the or against the defendant.
I think the point that Mr. Muthuraman made, and I think talking about the quality of the jurors and also the way the debate went, probably points also to an inherent weakness in our own judicial system. You see, a lousy prosecution or a listless defense can lead to somebody going to the gallows for no fault of theirs. At least in their system, I do admit Mr. Muthuraman is right, and that is probably a theatrical license that the director has taken, which he's entitled to make a point. But at least there is a check and balance mechanism where the jurors, if they are really good, can sometimes kind of go against or in fact overthrow some of the arguments that are presented in courts. But whereas in our courts, the my bap is that prosecutor or that defense fellow, and the judge, if he's already predisposed, like the judge was in this particular case, it would have been guilty and on site. So I think it's a very powerful theme.
Absolutely correct.
Suresh, without getting into the quality of our system versus theirs, my point was that if the principle of constituting a jury was to reflect what is in society, putting qualifying criteria would actually embed those prejudices into the jury. So it was necessary to keep it, as common as possible. In which case, if I stretch a point, if society is complete with criminals, chances are you'll have all criminals on the jury. And so it's just a point which makes me wonder, should juries be selected with certain predetermined criteria where prejudices creep in? That was the only thing I was trying to say.
I think one thing that comes out from all this is that we are probably basically very likely to be prejudiced in some form or the other. So that would be the average person's reaction. We may claim that we are independent, free thinking, all that, but inherently there will be some bias or the other within us, however much we want to hide it. And it will creep out at moments of stress or important occasions. And the other thing is that we can be manipulated. So those are two things. I mean, although it's power of persuasion, but persuasion can work both ways. So these are the two things which will affect a jury. And that is why you were saying that we should have a jury system. In fact, Bombay and I don't know how many states in India, Bombay did have a jury system. And you know how it was overturned? Like when it was stopped somewhere in the late 50s, when there was a very interesting case where a naval officer shot his wife's lover, and there's a movie in fact about it. And the general thing is that the news media projected the whole thing in such a way as to make a kind of hero out of him, as a result of which all the jury, in spite of the evidence to the contrary, said that he was innocent. So that is when the case went from the lower courts, high court, Supreme Court, and it was overturned, and this jury system itself was completely overturned. So from that time onwards, jury has been removed because it is, as we were all discussing, you can bias it, you can manipulate it, and ultimately end up with a person who is innocent being declared guilty.
In fact, Shibu, the first point that you made about personal prejudice which may exist and we may be not at all conscious about it is very vividly presented in the film in terms of the last juror. I mean, he is the guy who fought and almost would never have agreed to say guilty till his wallet falls down, and his whole past of what his children did to him and his disgust with his children is the deep-rooted sort of prejudice which he had allowed to judge this Latino kid, and in determining this relationship between the dead man and the son.
So one question which is actually arising out of what Ravindran said, how do you screen prejudices for a case when you constitute a jury? It is difficult. How do you know somebody has these kind of prejudices and those prejudices are not good for this case and hence he should not be part of the jury?
Behavioral scientists, that's what Hema was pointing to. As behavioral scientists have studied more and more, this is becoming from a random pick from a voter list to an art to a science now. So you have psychologists, as she says.
So you have these John Grisham series of books, right? I mean, I don't have first-hand information. It's all from what you have read. But John Grisham, in his books, brings it out very nicely. There are like some, when the jury pool is chosen, there are like tens and hundreds of people who are being sifted. And when jury selection itself takes like 20-25 days. And you have that prosecutor team and the defense team sitting there with all their body language reading people, psychologists, private investigators would have a whole portfolio of each of these jurors sitting there. So so now it is a little bit more foolproof than it was earlier. So when every juror is put up, whether to be chosen or not, and you have only, I think, so many, I think, suppose the prosecutor will feel, oh, this is like a white male, who will probably go with the prosecution. And the defense might pick a black woman, a single mother on benefit. So that is the kind of profile they want to fill the jury with. And they have all this background information. They are debt-ridden, they have paid their taxes, he is paying alimony towards his wife, there is a history of domestic violence against this fellow, cigarette smoking. Grisham's, one of his novels were about the massive litigation against cigarette companies. So any history of a death due to cancer in the family, the prosecution defense would want him on the jury. Meanwhile, prosecution doesn't want him. So they go through minute testings. And then with extreme care, this jury is chosen because they have to be sifted through by both the defense and the prosecution. Of course, in 1950s, that was not there. So that is why now you have so many court cases, right? That guy was hung and now DNA evidence has proven that he was actually not guilty, So that is why you go into this broader realm of where people are against capital punishment, because that is irreversible. You would have sent him to the electric chair and fried his brains out. But then now you find out that he's not guilty. It's irrevocable. So, that's all part of the branchings of this, legal system that we are considering.
Since we are talking about prejudices for another, where richer people who can afford a good lawyer can get this kind of defense. The public defender doesn't care about this. So, he fries his, he just accepts what he did to him.
Yeah, Prasad, I want to make one more point. since we are talking on the selection of the jury and the composition of the jury, my view is that the individual caliber of the members of the jury is less important than the mix of the jury. It is like any management team. You forgot all the 12 brilliant people, it's not going to work. You need different dimensions to be brought. And that different dimensions is extremely important, which is why in the selection of a jury, I mean, just to give a simplistic example, if you have 12 engineers, there is a certain direction in which the conversation will go. If there are 6 engineers and 6 non-engineers, their conversation will go in a different direction and probably in a more fruitful direction. So in the selection of the jury, for which we don't have a good enough system in India, we need to evolve a system by which people with different backgrounds, people with different views, finally it's a question of debate, having a debate and arriving at and convincing people. So that composition is far more important than the individual caliber of people.
I have a doubt. Scientifically, they bring in a lot of proofs and witnesses, change the things. So will the jury suddenly change all his opinion and the decisions? Can the scientific proof or the witness change the decision of the juries? Then why we need juries?
I think if the judge finds that they have taken a completely nonsensical view, he can declare a mistrial, I think.
At the last minute, you have a much better proof. Will the jury change?
No, but all that is, by the time the jury starts debating, the trial is over.
Yeah, trial is over. You
trial
can't
is over.
Have new
then
evidence.
No more information comes in. Some of them are even sequestered.
Before they declare their decisions.
No. Once they go into take the
jury, there can't be any more.
So that is the final step, is it?
Yeah. After trial, they go into deliberations. Then no more information comes into them.
So
that
is why only in Hindi movies you have last minute evidence coming in.
Yeah.
But the jurisprudence systems allows for appeal. So if there is fresh evidence, there are laws which allow facts to be introduced. Although generically, only principles of law you can appeal on, you can't appeal on facts. But like Prasad mentioned, if the judge finds that it's nonsensical, he could overrule the thing. But
on a lighter note, I find that this movie, 63 years on, you still find lookalikes of Trump and Biden on the jury. Yeah?
Exactly.
You see them operating full flow. You realize, the Bidens and the Trumps, where they have come from.
Trump will agree on the 13th hour.
It's a snapshot of the human society.
Yeah,
is there a Hindi version of this movie?
Yeah. Ruka Hua Faisla.
What's the name?
Ruka Hua Faisla.
Oh.
Pankaj Kapoor, Karamchand Pankaj Kapoor played the Henry Fonda role.
No. K.K. Raina did. K.K. Raina played the Henry Fonda role, and the difficult man was played by Pankaj Kapoor.
Yeah.
Oh, acha, okay.
There's
So if you're interested in watching that Nanavati case thing, it's Rustam.
Oh, they murdered
the movie Rustam.
Akshay Kumar played the role.
Yeah,
Akshay Kumar,
but they have distorted quite a lot. They've taken huge poetic license or movie license. Huge.
Hindi movie.
Yeah, because I mean, with great difficulty, they have agreed that Babe has gone and slept with that other guy. I don't know. I mean, that itself must have been taken a lot for them to, stomach. But they have made him out to be a big hero and whatnot. So, yeah, but you can see it for the, or better still, we read Wikipedia.
For the context of what caused the jury system to be dismantled in India.
Yes.
Hey, Benny, just to respond to what you said, I wasn't saying that we should not have people or we should not select jury. The point was prejudices are always there, and there are prejudices which you want in society. So if you're creating a jurisprudence system where you want to achieve certain standards, then you bring in jury who will protect those standards, right? You shouldn't be saying that you want to reflect what is in society and fill in the jury and then hope that they will do the best thing in the interest of
Yes,
future
yes.
society.
Very correct. Very
Raman's
correct.
point is valid. Jurors need to be selected.
Jurors have
because-
to have standards.
Yeah, it has to move towards in a certain direction.
Going back to what Mr. Muthuraman was saying, the mix is important. But again, every group has one or more leading members who influence thinking of the jury, as in this case. So that's also important. You have the mix, but you also have one or two leading individuals.
Murli is coming from a lot of hurt with RCB having 11 experts getting more.
Let's not go there. Let's not go there.
I know.
Okay,
I
don't
already
rub
hurt
salt
him
on
pretty
open
badly.
wounds.
I beginning itself, I hurt him
Okay.
really badly,
All right.
unknowingly.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you very much.
Okay, thank you everybody.
you.
Good
Thank you,
discussion.
guys.
And thanks for
Good night.
the movie. We look forward to some more suggestions from you.
Yes, yes. And all will be black and white films from the 1940s.
Oh, wonderful. Prasad, your selection is awesome.
Thank you.
Okay. So,
Thank you.
Good night, guys.
hey, next week somebody has to pitch in. So think about it.
Good night, guys.
Good night.
Some more stories for next week.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye. Bye. Bye.